called the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE, as Donald Trump's asking Elon Musk and the businessman Vivek Ramaswamy to lead this department. It is not a department as such. Instead, it's going to be some adjunct, some adjacent, who knows what, that the two will suggest ways to slash regulation and spending. Musk himself set ambitious goals during the campaign.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
Don Kettl's with me. You're the Professor Emeritus of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. There's a huge difference between government and private organizations. You know that. People don't really understand that government has a certain level of inefficiency built into it by necessity because of minority rights, special interest, the need for transparency, blah, 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 blah. You can't run government like a private company. Explain.
You can't, in part because, and we keep trying and we keep failing and keep demonstrating the fact, Congress really isn't like a board of directors. It's a co-equal branch in the United States to begin with. And then on top of that, there's the enormous complication of the federal programs, because the federal government tends to get stuck with all the issues and the problems that the private sector either cannot do or will not do. And then beyond that, on top of that, we have lots of guarantees that we built into the system to try to prevent it from being just run by one person according to one whim in one direction for one time.
But that's going to change, because the reality is now, after this election and the people being appointed towards it, if you've got Elon Musk at the side saying, get rid of this rule, change that rule, do this rule. And by the way, Mr. President, you can do all of this with executive order or executive fiat, and the president does it. What happens?
Well, what's going to happen is that we're going to have an enormous struggle between Congress and the president over just how far the president can go. And then in addition to that, we're also going to be seeing just what it is that Congress means. The Senate has always been very jealous of its prerogatives. In the House, we never know exactly what it is that the Congress is going to be, because there are so many different factions on the inside. And then there's also the fundamental divide within the conservatives at this point, between the libertarians who just simply want to shrink the government down as much as possible, and other conservatives who want to try to use government power to try to drive their agenda as much as they could.
So that's the political side, in a sense. That's the sort of the making of the sausages, if you will. But what about the practical effect further down? As cuts are made, as programs are terminated. I read, a comment on Elon Musk's own Twitter feed basically says, what happens, for instance, when you find that you've cut something and special education for those with needs gets cut? Isn't that the reality? Government has responsibilities that no one else has.
Well, that's right. Government does a lot of things that people want and expect, and that if it doesn't happen, bad things will happen politically. There's not only, for example, the special needs students, and what happens if they can't get the educational programs that they need? What happens to air traffic control if we don't have enough air traffic controllers in the towers? What happens to the safety of the food supply and a baby formula if it turns out we don't have enough inspectors to make sure that's safe? And what happens if people are taking drugs that might very well injure or kill them? So there are things that people expect that government will do for them, and by the time you start adding all that up, it turns out to be very hard to cut it back.
One final question. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Never anything quite like this. Back in the beginning of the Reagan administration, there was a commission created to try to privatize as much as possible. And Reagan, in fact, pulled a lot of that off. But turns out that at the end of his administration, he had more federal employees than he had at the very beginning. So it turns out to be really hard to make this stuff stick. And most of these commissions end up treading water, creating some headlines, and in the end, not really getting done what they want to do.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I'm grateful.